Please welcome Dr. Christine Kaszycki, Ring of Fire Assistant Deputy Minister, Coordinator and Secretariat from the Ministry of Northern Development and Mines, to share an update on the Ring of Fire development. S'il vous plaît, veuillez accueillir Dr. Christine Kaszycki, sous-ministre adjointe du Cercle de Feu, coordinatrice au ministère du Développement du Nord et des Mines, qui fera une mise à jour au sujet des développements du Cercle de Feu.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. That's a pretty hard act to follow, actually. It scared me. Is there? Oh, okay, great. Thank you. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for the opportunity to be here today. Thank Mayor Bolio for the gracious invitation. This is the second time I've been able to participate at the Grow Greenstone event, and from what I've seen, it looks like it's a tremendous success, a great opportunity for networking, and I'd like to acknowledge Minister Gravel, who's here to lend his gracious support today. I'll be keeping an eye out. If I'm saying anything wrong, just let me know. Okay. Anyways, I wanted to take the opportunity today to provide you with a bit of an update on the Ring of Fire initiative. I know that this is something that has factored quite heavily into some of the economic planning for the community of Greenstone. I also know that Blaine Bouchard, who's with the Ring of Fire Secretariat, gave a presentation earlier today on the mining supply and services sector and some of the opportunities that may relate to that. So Blaine's sitting over there, and I'm not going to repeat a lot of that information. But I thought what I would do today, and first of all, figure out how to work the. Is it? There we go. No? Oh, so is somebody else flipping the slides for me? Oh, okay, thanks. I'll just say next then. Okay, thanks. So I thought what I'd do today is provide a bit of an overview on the current status of the project, sort of reaffirm the Ring of Fire vision and commitments, talk a little bit about the current industry context, and again, just kind of touch base for those who may not be familiar on the project overview, the opportunities, et cetera. And then just point to some of the types of activities that we're undertaking to try to advance exploration and development within the Ring of Fire region, focusing specifically on some of the supportive geoscience mapping that, that the ministry undertakes as part of their regular programming. Oh, it's over here now? Okay. And then as a second part, I wanted to go through the key commitments, talk about our work and commitments to First Nations and their participation, community readiness, particularly at a community level, some of the work that we've been undertaking over the last 2 to 3 years. Talk a little bit about the regional process. I know you'll be hearing from Minister later today, as well as Bob Ray tomorrow morning. But just to talk a little bit about where we're at in that discussion, and then a little bit about some of the regional infrastructure work and the DevCo that was announced in November and again in February. So just to remind folks, ahead of me here a little bit, so I think everybody knows where the Ring of Fire is located. I thought it was important just to reaffirm and to revisit the holistic vision for the Ring of Fire that the province of Ontario is advancing. Certainly a key focus on First Nations participation in economic development initiatives, providing an opportunity for community economic, social supports, as well as opportunities for community-based infrastructure development to help improve community self-sufficiency and create business development opportunities. Also looking at maximizing value-added opportunities, and this, of course, focuses on the mining supply and services expertise that creates the opportunity for additional business development, but also focusing on opportunities for new value-added processing and new industrial sectors, should they be related. Building wealth for Ontarians. Obviously, new mines create jobs and investment and create fiscal returns, and these are all very important aspects of advancing the vision for the Ring of Fire, but not to the point that it's not done without responsible development. And so appropriate environmental protections need to be in place, managing long-term and additive impacts, and then planning for regional infrastructure development. If I could have the next slide, please. But before I get into all of that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the current industry context. And I think, as most folks in this room are aware, that market demands, particularly for base metals and iron ore, have decreased with slower growth rates in China and other BRIC countries. This has had an impact around the globe, with investment capital becoming increasingly scarce. And within Ontario and Canada and over the world, investment in exploration has decreased over the past few years. And I've just shown a couple of graphics here. The top one on the right-hand side, looking at Ontario exploration expenditures from 2000 up to 2014. And you can see that it has decreased substantively since 2011, although I will say Ontario still holds the leading position in Canada with respect to exploration investment. So our market share in terms of exploration investment continues to be at the top. However, it's a worldwide phenomena associated with decreasing investment related or available for exploration, and the graph on the bottom just illustrates that in another way, which is an illustration of equity raised on the Toronto Stock Exchange in red and other exchanges around the world in yellow, again illustrating the same context, that investment for exploration and mine development has been challenging over the last couple of years. Analysis, and this is from our resident geologist program within the Ministry of Northern Development Mines, would suggest that good projects are getting funded, those that are bankable, those that have completed feasibility. It's becoming very difficult for small juniors with very early stage exploration projects to raise capital. Just go to the next slide. This just kind of illustrates the situation in northwestern Ontario. And what you're seeing here is the number of active mining claims in the different districts. These are our M&D&M administrative districts across Ontario. The point being that while we've seen a big decrease in terms of exploration investment in Ontario, that this is not at least translated to a significant degree in northwestern Ontario to decreasing number of active claims. What it does mean is that many of those claims are probably not being actively worked right now. And the last point being that the major increase seen in Thunder Bay since about 2006 is related in large part to much of the activity in the Ring of Fire region, and so you're seeing that manifest there. If we look at the next slide, which just shows exploration by commodity in northwestern Ontario, again, this illustrates the very large focus on gold exploration in the northwest. But I would point out that the silver wedge at the top, the red wedge at about 10 o'clock, and the blue wedge at about, 7 to 9, I guess, which is the blue is copper nickel PGE, red is copper zinc, and the silver is chromium, do relate to a lot of the exploration that has been undertaken within the Ring of Fire region, and so it does form a fairly significant part of exploration investment within northwestern Ontario. Moving on then to, setting the context for the Ring of Fire. I think everyone has seen this slide probably more times than they would care to remember, but it's a useful slide in that it illustrates a number of aspects of the Ring of Fire developments. Certainly the two proposed infrastructure corridors, the east-west corridor that Noront is proposing in light purple, the north-south all-season road corridor that Cliffs was a proponent for, shown in light orange, and then embedded within that is KWG's railway claims. Can also illustrate very well here the communities that are potentially impacted by Ring of Fire developments, shown in red: Webequie, Nabinabek, Niskantika, Yamatung, Martin Falls, Arrowland, right at the very southern end of the proposed north-south corridor, Long Lake, 58, Janugaming, and Constance Lake. These communities all form the communities of the Matawa, are members of the Matawa Tribal Council, and are part of the group of 9 communities that are currently engaged in negotiations through the regional process that's being led by Bob Ray. In addition, you can see that there are municipalities and other First Nations communities that could potentially be impacted depending on which infrastructure corridor is selected. Certainly Pickle Lake at the western end of an east-west corridor, Mishkegoguming, and just to the south of that, potentially impacted by increased traffic, and north-south corridor, the communities that I've already mentioned, in addition to the municipality of Greenstone. And then in terms of a ferrochrome processing facility, certainly additionally impacted communities near Sudbury. With respect to potential environmental impacts, again, you can't forget the coastal communities of the Mushkegowuk Tribal Council, Attawapiskat, Kashechewan, Fort Albany. So it's a very complicated and a broad mix of potentially impacted communities, depending not just on mine site development, but on where infrastructure is developed and how that infrastructure is developed. If we look at the mineral opportunities that are associated, again, I think folks are well aware of this. Discoveries include chromite, nickel, copper, zinc, gold, kimberlite, etc. Chromite is your mineral for chromium, mainly used in stainless steel. The value of the nickel deposits and chromite deposits alone have been estimated at $60 billion. These are the known deposits that have been estimated by an independent third party. So this would be Black Thor, Black Label, and the Eagle's Nest deposits. There are a number of additional discoveries and mineral deposits within the region that, once proved up, could certainly add to that value. And again, about 20 different companies that are currently holding claims within the area. Next slide just provides a brief history of discovery. I'm not going to go through all of this, but I thought it was an interesting illustration of how initial staking in the year 2001-2002, option to De Beers for diamond exploration resulted in copper zinc discoveries. Follow-up exploration resulted in the Eagle 1 nickel copper PGE discovery, and that leading on to the Blackbird chromite deposits, Black Thor, Big Daddy discoveries in 2009, 2010, etc. So a very sort of consistent history of discovery, a broad range of commodities, and certainly some significant opportunity within the region. We can move on to the next slide, which just kind of summarizes the commercial projects and where they currently sit. I think, as everyone is aware, on November 20th, Cliffs Natural Resources announced that it was indefinitely suspending work on its chromite development project. I think significantly, as part of that announcement, Cliffs signaled their continued interest in the potential of the Ring of Fire. They still refer to this as a very good project, that they believe in the value of the mineral deposits, and have signaled their ongoing interest in continuing to engage in discussions, particularly around infrastructure and the DevCo, as well as with First Nations communities. As part of their investment planning, I think folks know it's an open pit, an all-season road north-south from the mine to Nakina, a ferrochrome processing facility, and the total amount of investment required to support this, $3.3 billion, and a very significant number of direct and indirect jobs across the economy associated with that. In terms of, next slide, please. Additional commercial projects, the Noront project certainly has announced its plan for developments of its deposits in the Ring of Fire. Significantly, they've been very public about indicating that their position's not changed in the light of the announcement made by Cliffs, and that they have always continued to develop plans in terms of use of an east-west corridor. Their investment planning totals about just a little over $600 million, includes underground mine, concentrator, east-west all-season road. They've completed feasibility and have submitted a draft of their environmental impact statement to SEIA in December of 2013, which, as I understand, is currently being reviewed. And KWG Resources continues to advance their geotechnical assessment and analysis for a potential rail corridor. It's the current status of these projects, and in particular the continued sort of support by each company for their own particular infrastructure corridor certainly was a key factor in terms of decision to try to address these divergent interests through the implementation of a development corporation, and I'll come back to that in a few minutes. Just carrying on, though, for mineral development opportunities, in addition to the two key commercial projects, a number of active exploration projects in the region. These include McDonald Mines, their Butler project, copper zinc, Bold Ventures, and a joint venture with KWG Resources on their Black Horse chromite deposits. A little bit further south and not illustrated here, Northern Shield and Discovery Harbor are following up on a copper zinc deposit, and further west along a potential east-west corridor, Northern Superior Resources has been undertaking some work on a gold property in that area. So there's ongoing exploration. The key companies that have commercial interest or most advanced projects are continuing to signal their interest in pursuing development in the region. One of the things that Ontario does and has been doing in terms of supporting ongoing exploration, investment, and development in the region is investing in supporting geoscience. So this map illustrates projects that have been undertaken by the Ontario Geological Survey since 2009. The total value of that investment is about $2.9 million, which has leveraged some additional federal funding of about $1.9 million. Generally speaking, there's a full range of geoscience activities that are taking place, bedrock mapping, diamond drill hole logging, lake sediment geochemistry, airborne geophysics, indicator mineral sampling, and superficial geological mapping. All of this in an effort to help provide a more consolidated view of the geology and mineral potential within the region. There's been very good support from the companies who have undertaken exploration up there to allow access to drill core data. Much of it has been relogged and presented in a consistent format. And so all of this work is really intended and does help to support future investment decisions within the region, and has been, I think, a very successful endeavor by the Ontario Geological Survey. So lastly, I'd like to just take a little bit of a time to talk about some of the key commitments that have been made over the last couple of years as Ontario has been moving to support developments. Certainly wanting to support developments in a way that's socially, environmentally sustainable, respectful of Aboriginal and treaty rights. In May of 2012, I think folks may recall that there was an announcement at that time where Cliffs was committing to their full $3.3 billion investment in Ontario. Ontario indicated that they were committed to supporting infrastructure development into the Ring of Fire, and at the same time also to a First Nations framework that focused on First Nations participation and benefit from the Ring of Fire development. And this was very much focused on a community-based approach and included 4 key themes: socioeconomic and community supports, regional infrastructure planning, regional environmental monitoring, and resource revenue sharing. Work in trying to implement that approach from May through to March 2013 focused a lot on direct work with individual communities and trying to understand what opportunities there were for working with communities on a more collective or collaborative basis, particularly for things like regional infrastructure planning, regional monitoring, things that had a regional context for it. In March of 2013, the chiefs of the Matawa member communities of the Matawa Tribal Council met with the Premier and requested community-based regional process of negotiation. Premier certainly was very enthusiastic in her support of that, and negotiations commenced in July of 2013. And these are the regional process negotiations that are led by Bob Ray for the Matawa Chiefs and Frank Iacobucci, former Supreme Court Justice for Ontario. Those discussions have been proceeding well, and we are hopeful that we'll be in a position to finalize the first phase of negotiations through a regional framework at some point in the very near future, and that this regional framework will actually set the stage for how future negotiations will unfold. I think it's important to note that all 4 themes that we're committed to in May of 2012 certainly have carried through in terms of the regional process negotiations. And then subsequent to that, in November 2013, in recognition of the need to bring some coordination to the divergent interests in terms of infrastructure development in the Ring of Fire, Ontario announced the intent to establish the Development Corporation. And at the same time, Ontario reiterated its commitment to a significant investment in infrastructure that would be delivered through the Development Corporation. So the corporation basically set up to actually undertake the financing, planning, construction, operation, and maintenance of infrastructure within the Ring of Fire area. And then most recently in February, Deloitte was announced as a successful candidate to act as a neutral third party for all partners in developing the DevCo. So I just want to take a few minutes now and talk a little bit more about some of the work that has been underway throughout all these different steps in the sequence since we first began working on the Ring of Fire initiative. In terms of First Nations participation, as I'd mentioned earlier, clearly a very strong commitment to community-level engagement. Ontario started with very much a community-based focus and continues to be committed to working with individual communities on community-specific initiatives. We've signed Memorandum of Cooperation and Understanding with Webequie First Nations and Martin Falls in 2012. We're also engaging at a very community-based level on land use planning initiatives, and I'll speak a little bit more about that in a minute. But all Matawa communities who are eligible, who have traditional lands in the far north, are engaged in land use planning to some degree or another, and work on completing those plans is progressing quite well. And then, as I'd mentioned earlier, the regional process that began in July of 2013, following the meeting with the Premier, Minister Gravel, and Minister Zimmer in March. All of this, needless to say, needs the collaboration and participation of our federal partners. They have a critical role to play in this project. I think we've undertaken some very good work with them in terms of some of the social supports, in particular community well-being, capacity building, and some skills training initiatives, but there's, as always, more that can be done. So in terms of community readiness, I've spoke to the two key elements of that, the socioeconomic development supports that really relate to workforce readiness, skills training, and mentorship programs, et cetera, and community wellness. And this focuses on improving access to timely health services, reduces the incidence of communicable diseases, prescription drug abuse, et cetera. We are working very closely with First Nations communities, both individually and in a collective way through some of their own institutions, such as KCATS, to support skills training, capacity building, et cetera. Just move on to the next slide, please. In terms of community readiness, health and well-being, we're engaged in programming both individually and with the federal government on a variety of initiatives focusing on youth opportunities, so partnering with organizations such as Right to Play, One Laptop Per Child to deliver youth programming in communities, focusing on mental health and addictions, and this would be really enhancing programming and resources focused on mental health and addictions. This includes dedicated workers, telemedicine equipment, advice from experienced professionals, and some significant investments both by Health Canada and Ontario Ministry of Health. In terms of community safety, there has been a recent recognition through the federal government that additional supports for victims and counseling and referral services will be needed, and so we've begun some joint work in terms of community safety with respect to Public Safety Canada. In terms of community readiness, skills, and training, there have been a number of focused investments on skills and training to support First Nations members. Since 2012, there have been over 1,300 individuals that have participated in programs that range from awareness activities about mining and mineral development and associated careers, some of these delivered through initiatives like Mining Matters. There have been focused investments to support educational upgrading, life skills courses that have enabled folks to complete their high school education, and very specific skills training for things like heavy equipment operators, diamond drillers, remote cook training, et cetera. You can see the graphic here just illustrates the lion's share of participants have at least engaged initially in awareness training to begin to have a better appreciation for the types of opportunities that are available, followed by very specific skills training and educational upgrading. But all of this has been undertaken over the last couple of years, and we would expect to see these concerted efforts to advance into the future. In terms of community-based land use planning, I'm not going to go into a lot. I mentioned earlier that all of the remote Matawa communities are engaged in community-based land use planning to some degree or another. It's clear that land use planning is a very important tool that enables First Nations communities to plan for how lands will be used in their area, bring forward local knowledge and historical relationship to the land, and community interests for economic development. Ontario, in their role, certainly continues to support interests in economic development and conservation, but also provides investments in broad-scale mapping and acquisition of information to enable more informed decisions with respect to land use planning. So I'll talk about these in a second. The other key commitment that we had made was with respect to long-term environmental monitoring. And this relates to monitoring over a longer period of time, over a larger area, to enable us to begin to understand what the potential for combined impacts of large projects could be. Includes collection of baseline data, participation in planning and implementation of long-term planning, certainly a very big focus on direct engagement with First Nations and local communities in that regard. And then working certainly with First Nations communities to identify how traditional methods could be employed. The next slide just illustrates some of the work that's been underway in terms of baseline data collection. MND&M, MOE, and M&R are working together to collect the scientific data. Certainly a lot of the geoscience mapping has a multifold application that I referred to earlier. Scientific data collection and baseline studies have been begun by MOE. These include surface water, biological sampling, stream, groundwater sampling, etc. Much of this work has been undertaken collaboratively with communities, and community members have been employed in collection of information. In addition, scientific data data collection has been underway with respect to a broader environmental monitoring programs such as biodiversity, climate change, far north hydrology, etc. Much of this work, in addition to being undertaken with communities, is also being done collaboratively with universities and other federal institutions. And lastly, I'll just refocus a little bit on regional infrastructure planning. As I mentioned earlier, this was a key commitment back in 2012 and forms a key aspect of the regional negotiations that are underway right now with the Matawa communities. The thing to recall, though, is that while there's an initial and focus and priority placed on roads to access mines, regional infrastructure planning is about more than that. It's about community access roads in terms of enabling communities to be able to have local access, electricity, broadband and wireless. I know there are projects underway right now in terms of bringing broadband to remote communities, and that funding is flowing now for feasibility for the Matawa communities in that regard. Building on that, the Ring of Fire Development Corporation, as I'd mentioned, November 8th, we announced Ontario announced the creation of the Development Corporation. The intent here to bring together key parties with common interests, determine infrastructure needs, secure financing, and manage the design, engineering, construction, and maintenance of infrastructure. The province has begun to contact potential partners. I think this has been manifest in the recent appointment of Deloitte to act as an independent third party to work with the partners, provide independent third-party advice, and certainly help the partners, both industrial partners, federal government, provincial government, and First Nations partners to understand what the scope and governance model of this development corporation should be. The last piece that we haven't really done a lot of focused work on yet, and this in part relates to advancing some of the negotiations through the regional process, is on resource revenue sharing. Clearly, the province has made a commitment to sharing direct revenues that accrue from mining developments within the region, and we expect that to be a key focus as the regional process negotiations move forward. So in terms of next steps, while we are advancing our work with communities and through the regional process, this regional process negotiations, this is all in an effort to create the environment for a positive investment environment when the economic situation or market conditions turn around, that our ongoing work with communities, positive outcomes of regional process negotiations, delivering and developing a development corporation model that supports investment in regional infrastructure will set the framework that enables the investments in the Ring of Fire to come to fruition and carry forward the promise that we all see in terms of the Ring of Fire. So I'll stop there and thank you for listening today, and happy to take a couple of questions if there are folks that want to.
Chief Teresa Nelson and Nibigazag again. I was just wondering, you had 1,300 people up north taking the training and whatnot from your presentation. I was just wondering, is there a plan B? Is that going to be enough people to sustain this development, and are you going to be asking others like Métis groups, other area First Nations, or even local Greenstone people for any training opportunities?
Yes, for sure. I think what I've illustrated here is some of the work that's been done very early with the First Nations that are sort of most directly impacted by the Ring of Fire developments. But I know that there's a number of other initiatives that are ongoing across the region, focused not just on First Nations, but Aboriginal communities writ large, opportunities for training and development, labor market surveys, work with the municipalities, et cetera. So while I've spoken specifically about the work with the, mainly with the Matawa communities, there certainly is a broader scope of opportunity for sure.
Hi, Christine. Jonathan Dart, British Consul General in Toronto. Could you spell out to us what, in an ideal world, if everything goes perfectly well, what would be the key stages between now and actually getting shovels in the ground in the Ring of Fire?
So the key stages, we have a number, I talked about a number of initiatives that are underway right now. Certainly the regional process negotiations that have commenced have elements to it that will help to bring certainty for future investments, those being focused on enhanced participation in environmental assessments is a key part of that. Participation in infrastructure development, so the ability to participate through the development corporation in ownership and operations of infrastructure. I think those are two key pieces that need to be in place in order to help facilitate and create the positive investment environment that will support investment within the region. Certainly environmental assessment processes need to be completed, permitting, and once those initiatives are have been completed, then the opportunity for shovels in the ground. That, of course, is assuming that companies continue to receive positive reception from their boards or can raise the funding that's required to enable the scope of investment, which in total is about $4 billion between these two projects, so significant amount of funding. But there is some very, I think, important work that we can be doing now that will set the stage for that.
Okay, I got it. Excuse me, my name is Audrey Fisher. I am a band member of Long Lac 58 First Nation, born and raised. Before December, I did a survey with the First Nation elders, approximately 30 elders within the community, but initially I got a hold of 19, and they were very concerned of their backyards being exposed, and with the chemicals, everything everything that's going to happen with the mining industry. And I sat here for about 2 hours, and I'd like to hear a little bit more. We're talking here about the business sectors, and we need to stay a little bit more focused on the elders' point of view as well. Like, I feel like they're partially being neglected, because within that survey I did, it was, they said they weren't listened to. And majority of the surveys I did, they said they weren't listened to. It was really sad. I was really, really sad, but on the other hand, they said they're willing to work with the mining industry. But I wish, and I'd like to hear a little bit more and bring forth in the meetings, speak of the elders, talk about them, not only the business part of it. We got to recognize our elders from our back home, and feel for them too. Like, I'm just speaking on their behalf. Miigwech.
Thank you very much. And I can't speak for communities, but I certainly do, in any of my experiences when I've been in communities, the elders bring a very significant contribution to community meetings, and I think any approach to community engagement could certainly benefit from ensuring that elders' voices are heard and are factored into an approach, a community-based approach in terms of moving forward. So, thank you. I agree.